So it's exactly 2 o'clock. So good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's On the Agenda webinar hosted by the European Liberal Forum. My name is Lauren Mason. Today, we're going to be looking at the question of deepfakes. We're asking, are we ready for the upcoming storm? You might have noticed that I'm not Svenja Hahn MEP, whose video message unfortunately has had a few technical difficulties on its way over to us. So we will be posting that on our website and our social media channels after the webinar. And I'm sure, as we've all seen, that the pace of deepfake technologies is advancing very quickly. It does raise some worrying questions about the lines between fiction and reality. And whilst these effects might originally have been meant for sort of entertainment purposes, we can see that they are having a bigger impact on our society and politics, and potentially therefore on the validity of the information we receive, how we process that, and ultimately on our democracies. But I'm sure it's not all doom and gloom, and I will leave it over to our speakers to give us a bit more nuanced view on how we can approach this phenomenon, better understand it, and better react to it. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Beatrice Rios, who is our excellent moderator for today, to lead us in the discussion. Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Indeed, there is a topic that it's very important, not only because of implications for democracy, but also security, question of data transfer, privacy, and the European Union wants to lead the way in coming with legislation to try to shape the regulation that we see at global level. We're going to be discussing about all these potential impacts that might have in our lives, and also how that legislation has been tabled, whether it's good enough, what are the shortcomings that we see in that legislation indeed. And for that, we have an amazing lineup of speakers who are going to be digging more into those challenges, but also those potential opportunities that this technology might bring into our lives. I don't want to take more of your time. I just want to recall you that we have a Q&A section where you can ask all the questions that you might have for our speakers. We're going to have a few introductory remarks for each one of them, and then we're going to go to your questions. We want to hear from you. We want to know what is it that you would like to know about this question and the role that the European Union is having in shaping the regulation around this technology. So make sure that you share those questions in the Q&A chat box. Now, let's get into it. First of all, I'd like to give the floor to Michael Mayer-Rosen, who is the Executive Director of Democracy Reporting International. Please, Michael, you have the floor. Tell us a little bit more.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you, Lauren. I'm very happy that we have this debate. In our view, it should be debated more and it should be highlighted more. So it's great that the European Liberal Forum is pushing this point on the agenda. We are a panel here of 3 men. Normally in our organization that is frowned upon, but you invited a female colleague of mine who couldn't make it. She's in another time zone, but I should mention it's Madeleine Brady, and she works in our organization very intensively on the question of deepfakes, manipulation of video, etc. And a lot of things I present to you here, she has worked out with colleagues in various research studies. And to orient you a little bit, I will show you some slides. And I want to see, we have tested that before, and I hope that works. Can you see that? Yes, good. So I give you a little outline of our thinking, and it's very much informed by a little longer study that we carried out involving many experts from different countries. And in particular of interest to us, we spoke with a lot of the tech companies about the threat of deepfake to understand their perspective, but as well think tanks, civil society, deepfake creators, etc. And what I say is partly based on that research to where we try to see where industry sees all this, where they see the threat level, etc. And what I say is a very skeleton version of a longer presentation because this is only kickoff. And we have published a lot on this also, which you see here and can find on our website. And I think very quickly and very briefly, I speak about I won't speak much about the understanding to keep it short, but focus more on threats and recommendations. I think the first important point is to understand, of course, that deepfake is not always harmful. There is non-harmful ways of deepfake. We mentioned here political satire, and in particular film production and the others as well. But we should understand that the industry is investing huge amounts of money into manipulating videos because it's seen as a great new field for filmmaking, basically. And we have the clear understanding that the spending is not matched at all by any spending on trying to deal with the potentially harmful impact of ever better deepfakes. And I think that's where one of our worries stem from. But just to say, deepfake as such is not harmful. Like almost any technology, you can use it for normal or non-harmful purposes or not. And if we look at harmful areas, we identified basically 3 blocks here. As an organization, we are particularly interested in democratic discourse. We monitor social media in many countries, especially around elections. And of course, if you think of deepfake there, it's a big worry because they could, really change potentially election outcomes if they suddenly come up briefly before election day. But more fundamentally, I think everybody dealing with this field is concerned that at some point, nobody will be able anymore to decipher what's true and what's wrong. And there will be a tendency that people stop believing anything. So it's not our invention, but Sam Gregory of the NGO Witness, he said, disbelief by default, this is the biggest risk, that there will be a point that you just don't believe anything anymore that you see online. And that could be things that are true. There could be something that a politician did do wrong, and it was recorded on video, but he or she will claim that it never happened and nobody knows what's true. Then there's a lot of harm, of course, to individuals also. We have that already now a lot in the field of fake pornography, with lots of pornography being created with stars and just being deepfakes, of course, which is very harmful, and that can be a way to attack public individuals, but also private, if you think here of things like revenge porn, etc. So this is a big worry also at the individual level. And then we have the state security level, also national security, cybercrime. There are many beautiful things that criminals can do with deepfakes for criminal purposes. We could also consider the risks for triggering conflict in certain societies that may be very conflict prone, and it's not difficult to imagine what you could do if you can make up videos to incense certain parts of the population. Then if we look at the threats, of course, I think at the moment a big concern would be disinformation from state actors who have high technical capabilities to work with advanced AI technology. And the big risk, the more advanced the technology is, the harder detection is. And that will then be the big question that, especially I mentioned elections, imagine there's very little time before election day and somebody or the public expects an authoritative assessment whether that video is true or false, and then you have a very advanced form of deepfake. That would be a big trouble. And if we look at the risk landscape, we know that video sharing is on the rise. So there is an ample field to be played if you want to work with deepfakes. Private messaging is also on the rise. And of course, the more things are shared in private, the less it's even possible to detect them in time and to take a position on them. And in many countries, we have rising polarization. And again, as I mentioned, video is a very powerful form to impact on that. And if we draw from that to the threats, there's a question of timing. I think there are many different opinions on that. Some industry experts say it's a matter of a few months. Others say, well, it's still a few years before this will come online in a big way. My sense is that we are drifting into it already. We have more and more stories. We work, for example, in Myanmar, where it became a big controversy just last week, I think, whether a video was real or not real, and many questions around that. And it may be that there will not be the one shocking deepfake story, but there will be more and more, and we wake up one day and it's just everywhere and the problem. So when it materializes, we shouldn't think that there's this one moment. It's just coming and the wave is growing. I mentioned the threat is this disbelief by default, that, you know, in the beginning of the internet, we were concerned that people are too naive and believe everything. But it's equally harmful if people believe nothing anymore. So that is a big threat. We also fear that victims are often vulnerable groups. I mentioned it already in the field of pornography. It's women who are mainly the vulnerable group, and the same is easily imaginable for ethnic minorities and others. Also important, I think, to understand that we think of detection and protection. Famous people, high-level politicians have an apparatus to protect them, but the moment you go down from that level and already think of let's say local politicians, they don't have such levels of protection. So they are much more vulnerable, and we need to understand that. To assess this threat, we came to the conclusion that perpetrators will need to have a clear intent and good technical capabilities and team, basically, and good local knowledge to make this really work well if they want to have that impact. There's still a bit of level of effort needed, so it's not that you could just do it very easily. And yeah, the impact is hard to assess before. The specific impact of one deepfake situation will be very dependent on the context. And then I finished with this slide. We could think about this in 3 different levels. So one is the technical preparedness, and I don't go into details because my time is almost over. But I think one thing I would like to point out here is provenance technology. This is still, in my view, quite promising, because you could try to identify at the source that a video is manipulated, or that a video is authentic, and every subsequent manipulation is then easily detectable. But that requires a massive industry effort with lots and lots of players involved, and in my view also with state diplomacy involved. And of course, technology now comes from many actors, China, for example. So I think one would need really high-level tech diplomacy to explore if there's an interest by main producers of technology to seriously look into that. And that's something I would love EU and others to do and to find out, because it is still the most interesting field to solve the problem before it gets much bigger. Of course, beyond the technical side, societal preparedness is always very important. Media literacy, as always, training of journalists, monitoring. At the moment, I think there's studies show that there's not much preparedness yet. People start talking about it, but there's little understanding how it works and what to look for. And then the platforms, they do say that they have policies and that they're doing something about it, but it remains a bit hazy, I would say, what exactly it is. And maybe the investment are not enough in this field. And here again, we could talk a little bit more what the EU could do. I think in the interplay between the AI Act and the Digital Services Act, there could be more focus on deepfakes. And since both acts are still in the making, we may be able to influence that. That would be a very good outcome. And I think I've used up my 10 minutes, and everything else we can discuss. Oh no, recommendations. Yeah, I mean, they flow from what I said. It's using the anti-disinformation framework. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Look at the whole ecosystem, society, companies, technical solutions. And also, maybe that's a new point I haven't mentioned. These crises can appear very, very fast. So I think I would encourage all actors to think them through before and have response protocols, and don't be wrong-footed if suddenly a high-level manipulated video appears that tries to have a big political impact somewhere. That's it for the introduction. Thank you very much. And we continue the discussion after the presentations.
Thank you so much, Michael. Indeed, I have many follow-up questions, but I think you touched upon some of the issues that we're going to be discussing later, which is indeed the role of the European Union. Question of state diplomacy, I think it's a very interesting and a very relevant one that we can discuss a little bit later. But before we do that, I want to give the floor straight away to our next speaker, who is Ruben Arcos. He's a PhD lecturer and researcher in communication science at the King Juan Carlos University in Madrid. So please, Ruben, you have the floor.
Yes, hello. Thanks so much, Beatriz. Thanks also to Laureen and the whole team of events at the European Liberal Forum for this kind of invitation. Yeah, so I'm going to share the screen. I have also some slides. Yeah, so here it is. Well, the thing is that, with this new information environment, we have this new kid in this new kid in town, which is the deepfakes, or as I also would like to call them, the AI-generated forgeries, which is a part of the whole audiovisual forgeries of the title. And I think it is relevant as well to think about this from the perspective of foreign information manipulation. So how foreign actors, state actors, non-state actors, or proxies can somehow interfere in our democratic processes by using these new tools at their hands. Of course, this is something that can be also used for the good. Like Michael was illustrating from the perspective of content, entertainment industry, and including the film industry, but also a lot of websites that might be needing some kind of audiovisual content to illustrate, their articles and this kind of stuff. So we have remarkable advantages brought by technology. But at the same time, they can create vulnerabilities and offer opportunities to malicious actors to influence and interfere through the means of manipulations, information manipulations. And this is because, as human beings, we need to rely at some point on others as sources of information. And this opened the door to be manipulated by others. In the case of deepfakes, this is about presenting something as documentary evidence. So it's okay, this is intended to be real, but it's not real at all. It has been created. And this involves not only videos, but also images, and importantly, sounds. For example, it is already available in the market, the possibility of sampling your own voice and then making that voice things that you have never said. So it's also the aural component of deepfakes, something that should be of concern. And I'm thinking here particularly in, for example, using these private messaging apps that with messages that come maybe from friends and colleagues and people that you usually trust, and then you are presented with something coming from these channels. And if this is a voice, can be the voice can be have been sampled. So we can start imagining in malicious scenarios, not only targeting politicians and relevant people in the public sphere, but also private persons that might be even more vulnerable. So from my perspective, we have, not only because of the deepfakes, but we have a kind of disturbing compound in our information environment, because the possibility of producing content of good quality, also content with good quality, but with bad intentions behind. We have our smartphones, we have different cameras. We also have video streaming platforms and the possibility of reaching to a lot of people in really fast. And then we have this other thing, which is the microsegmentation and the possibility of developing biographical ousing just with the information that it's out there, that we put out there. And the expectations of the users of the different platforms is not the same. It's not the same, the expectations of a Facebook user than the one of a Twitter user. But anyway, all these kind of factors, if you think about this, okay, this can create a potential scenario if we think in terms of, okay, so how if deepfakes democratize and it becomes very easy to develop these forgeries. This put us in the kind of malign or malicious demon hypothesis of Descartes in the Meditations on First Philosophy, when he was starting to think, okay, so how if what I think is real is not, there is a kind of demon that tries to deceive me. So we should avoid this kind of hypothesis, because it is not healthy to start doubting about everything. So if we don't want that, I think that we should put some kind of elements at the hands of the users of the information environment. Like, for example, doing, for example, this deepfake secure by design. I mean, for example, including kind of code or something that really tells the user that this is something that has been created, is a synthetic content. We have possibilities out there right now, for example, in using these kind of images that are in the slide, because there are already providers of synthetic content in the market. You can even download the content and purchase the content and use for all kinds of purposes. Of course, if you are committing an offense, you should be the law will be behind you. But we already know that the criminal groups don't matter this. Doesn't matter this much for these kind of criminal groups if they can achieve their aims and gain benefits in some way or another. I think that since technology starts to, or AI and starts to develop more and more, it will be increasingly difficult. There are currently some tips or some indicators for detecting this for the case of images and others. But as technology evolves, probably it will become very difficult. And it will be only through AI maybe that we will be able to identify these deepfakes. So, for example, there is a public release report by the FBI, recent one, from March 2021, in which they assess that malicious actors almost certainly will leverage synthetic content for cyber and foreign influence operations. So this is kind of red flag for the industry and people involved in, fighting with fraud and malicious activities. From the perspective of capabilities and things that it is possible to do, I will highlight a couple of them. One is, developing these capabilities in AI forgeries detection. So this basically means that law enforcement agencies and security agencies should have a workforce and skills able to do this. But it also applies for the users, because I think that the spread of this stuff and the manipulation, the success of the manipulation will be measured because how much impact this is making in society. So it's also about educating and making and building awareness of the users and how this can be used in foreign influence campaigns. So developing these analytic capabilities in image, video, oral, AI forgery identification, and don't forget the other traditional, fake content created with, which is the one that is more widespread. If you speak with fact checkers, what they will tell you is, okay, so what we are seeing is not deepfakes at all. We should be concerned already with, Photoshop-like manipulations. We also need to map the ecosystem of existing generative media, companies offering this and the existing softwares, and also the tools that are already available in the market to detect and probably invest in developments of this kind. Democratize the use of tools that can be potentially used by the users for identify these deepfakes. And then, from the perspective as well of law enforcement agencies and security agencies, kind of thinking potential scenarios of misuse in which the use of deepfakes can amplify some potential issue. This is usually, latent societal, political, economic issues already existing in societies that might be exploited by foreign actors in this kind of campaigns. And with this, I will stop and then look forward for the debate and questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Actually, there is an issue that you both mentioned, and is this question about, first of all, we need to get ready, we need to have the capabilities to confront these issues, not only at the level of law enforcement, which is absolutely key, but also the question of media literacy. And this is something that I very much would like to discuss a little bit later. But before we do that, I'm going to give the floor to our last speaker today, before we jump into the whole discussion. He's Henry Hyder. He's an advisor on deepfakes, disinformation and media manipulation. Please, Henry, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. And yeah, thank you, Ruben and Michael, for those excellent presentations. I do not have any nice slides today, but I hope I can build on these presentations and some of the points you both raised. So I've been working on deepfakes and synthetic media since they first emerged in late 2017. And my work is fundamentally focused on what I kind of refer to as deepfake cartography. That is, I'm trying to map this fast-moving and murky ecosystem, this space, and trying to help people in government, in business, in the media, cut through the noise and speculation surrounding deepfakes to reach an understanding of what is going on right now that we need to address immediately. What do we need to prepare for as a near future likelihood, and what is quite speculative in terms of long-term or potentially not problematic. And as the name of this session is called, it's about deepfakes and the coming storm. I think the narrative surrounding deepfakes in the media and in the popular kind of culture is one of kind of fear and uncertainty. A lot of media articles have quite sensationally covered deepfakes, talking about the end of truth, that you can't trust anything you see anymore, that hyper-realistic deepfakes are here and we can't do anything to stop them, that they're already causing huge problems in the disinformation ecosystem. Images of deepfakes of Trump pressing the nuclear button causing World War III, and a lot of this quite scary imagery. And so a lot of my research is about trying to, again, cut through that noise and help people understand what is actually going on and where this this kind of coverage and kind of perceived understanding falls short. And so I joined back in 2019 a company called Deeptrace, which is now called Sensity, which was the world's first deepfake detection company. And during my time at Deeptrace, I led our research or ecosystem mapping research. And during that time, I published a report called The State of Deepfakes 2019, which was the world's first kind of landscape analysis using quantitative data. And we found quite the opposite of what people were saying surrounding deepfakes already being an endemic problem with disinformation and cybersecurity. That by far the most common malicious use case was non-consensual sexual image abuse targeting women. And we found 96% of deepfakes online at that time were of this nature. And that while some signs of the disinformation ecosystem kind of engaging with deepfakes had shown up, and the same in the cybersecurity context, it was nowhere near as established as a lot of people believed it to be. And the predominant victim, and still to this day, in malicious use cases is women. Now, as deepfakes and synthetic media have evolved and continue to evolve, they kind of tend to do so along three sort of rough axes, I guess you'd say. So one is realism, right? So how good is the output? And we're not just talking here about face swapping or visual deepfakes. We're talking about synthetic audio replicating voices or other noises. We're talking about real-time lip synchronization or kind of deepfake puppetry, where your facial movements are replicated in a synthetic avatar. We're talking body pose transfer, so the ability to change someone's body movements based on a source video. And of course, some people would also include synthetic text generative models like GPT-3 in this category as well. So we have seen a dramatic increase in realism over the last 2 or 3 years, and this is importantly using not a huge amount more in terms of actual kind of computing power. And it is about building more efficient models, which either require less data or are fine-tuned to make the most of the poorer quality data. But I think the most significant change we've seen over the last couple of years with deepfakes is actually in commodification, as Ruben touched on. And this is that fundamentally the technology is trickling down from kind of academic and industry research centers into open source tools and into kind of consumer apps. And another report I wrote back in October of last year focused on a bot I had discovered on the messaging app Telegram, which allowed users to synthetically strip images of women, essentially as you would by uploading an image to WhatsApp. So you would upload an image of that person and they would be undressed. And this was incredibly worrying because it showed that as the technology becomes more accessible, it scales in terms of users, and also the people being targeted are increasingly private individuals, no longer the celebrities who were targeted in the earlier forms of deepfake sexual image abuse. But this has also been echoed in some other use cases with consumer apps. Now, back in 2019, we discovered that there are about 15,000 deepfake videos online. That was one of the big statistics. And we found that that was almost doubling from the same time the year before. Deepfake apps that allow users to create face swaps using one image with pre-trained AI models has completely changed the landscape of what deepfakes are being predominantly used for. So the most popular deepfake app called Reface, which launched about 18 months ago, has had 3 billion videos generated using its app. So you can see the amount of content now being generated, and again, touched on what Rubens was saying about the kind of accessibility of just high quality video production tools and cameras, is really changing what we really understand the deepfake landscape to look like. In terms of the threat vectors, again, we're starting to see cybersecurity use cases becoming more prominent, or certainly claims that they are. A verification in these contexts is quite hard, but there have been some uses where biometric systems appear to have been fooled by some quite crude, rudimentary deepfakes. And we've also seen some instances where deepfakes have been used in coordinated information operations on social media, specifically the use of fake images of people that don't exist to act as puppets for social media profiles and botnets. But the biggest impact that I think we need to be thinking about right now, and as Michael and Ruben both touched on, is this concept called the Lies Dividend, which is the disbelief by default framework, and as Ruben talked about, the kind of Cartesian skepticism. And we have observed this extensively over the last 3 years, and it is becoming more and more prominent because of this perverse relationship with growing awareness, which is important surrounding deepfakes and synthetic media, leading to this kind of plausible deniability that awareness grants. And we've seen several cases of this in a political context which have caused problems. Earliest was in Gabon in Africa, where an attempted coup was linked to a video of the president at the time, which was believed to be fake and confirmed that he was in ill health. And also, as Ruben hinted at, in Myanmar, I was involved in the analysis there with Sam Gregory that we did in real time as that event was unfolding, of a video which was claimed to be a deep fake and was not in fact the case, but it spread in that way on social media and was very hard to dispel that belief. And so tackling the Lies Dividend, this kind of disbelief by default, this sort of epistemological nihilistic perspective that deepfakes and synthetic media present, I think is one of the biggest challenges. And this is where, Beatrice, as you were talking about, media literacy is important, but it's also incredibly difficult to build that resilience. And I think media literacy is often cited as a kind of one size fits all solution of just, oh, we'll throw some media literacy in there. But actually executing on that effectively is incredibly challenging. there are so many other things that we could talk about here, and hopefully we'll get some chances to discuss maybe some policy approaches or some of the technological solutions, or delve into some of the malicious use cases in the discussion. But yes, I would like to pass back to you, Beatrice. And yes, I think Michael and Ruben did an excellent job of giving coverage of the areas that perhaps I haven't had a chance to discuss here.
Thank you so much for that, Henry. I have the impression that many of the questions that we're going to be discussing today are sort of philosophical in a way as well, because I wonder to some extent why, if actually individuals are the ones that are getting more targeted by deepfake, we put the focus on national security, we talk about democracy, which is obviously very important and it's a potential risk, but why are we not tackling all those issues first? And in addressing this question, I was wondering whether you think that we do have enough tools in law enforcement to address those issues. Are we persecuting these practices enough? And if not, why, and what is the alternative? What is it that we could be doing that we're not?
Yeah, so I think I can tell you for a fact, having discussed the challenges of synthetic media, both with law enforcement and the judicial system in several countries, including the European context, no, they are not well prepared at all. And indeed, this is a hugely problematic situation. And the case in Myanmar is a nice case study here. Oh, sorry, not the case in Myanmar. There was a case, pardon me, in the US, where there was this claim of a mum creating deepfakes of her cheerleading rivals to defame them. And this claim immediately was suspicious to me, because this was a 50-year-old woman, suburban mum in the US, and creating high quality deepfakes, which are dynamic. They were claims that they were making these girls vape and drink and stuff that will require a high level of sophistication to execute that. So I was immediately skeptical. And as the reports unfolded and she was eventually charged, ABC actually released a video that was allegedly a deepfake, and I analyzed it, and it was clearly not. And I put out a tweet about it, and it got picked up by some journalists who did some digging. And the long story short of this is that the DA for Pennsylvania, who brought the charges, dropped the claim that it was a deepfake because it clearly wasn't. But up until the point that they had the first hearing, this was the claim being put forward by the police, by the DA, and by the offense, the prosecution, the lawyers. And this came down to fundamentally just not understanding what a deepfake was and not having the tools to reliably and robustly analyze content. And in that situation, we're looking at a position where, as the tools get more accessible and more realistic as time goes on, a situation where prosecution or defense may just use a deepfake defense by default on any audiovisual media, say prove it's real or prove it's fake. And we have a critical shortage of media forensic experts worldwide, in particular in the global south and in less economically developed countries, let alone ones who will be willing to put their reputation on the line and potentially lives or livelihoods to say in a courtroom setting, this is real or this is fake. And given the current state of deepfake detection software, which is not very robust, it is hugely problematic. And I think I do not like to stir up panic, but I'm deeply worried about this in these contexts, especially, as you said, when it touches private individuals who don't have financial resources to hire private investigators or very expensive legal aid.
Do we have the technological capability to do that, though, or this is something that indeed we still need to develop, as Ruben was mentioning, but also the question of state diplomacy regarding all these different tools. Maybe you would like to jump, Michael, Ruben, about this question of, do we have the actual technological capabilities to address those issues, or it's something that we definitely need to invest because the technology is just evolving faster than we actually do to tackle the potential risk that they might entail?
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Michael. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No problem.
Okay. Well, I think that we are always a little behind. That since when new tools appear, they are not thought from the perspective of security, what potential problems they might create. So it's somehow that we are always behind, and we probably need to invest more in both in research, not only deepfakes, but also the other kind of images, videos, and it's also about training the force that it's able to do this. But if we think in these kind of scenarios of a common citizen being potentially being manipulated, it's clear that citizens, not even in European countries, have they might be very overconfident in their capability of identifying fake content, but I don't think it is the case. So I will say that introducing some more information in the environment with cases, stuff that has been happening, aiming to educate the users is probably a good solution. Might be through higher education, but it's also the other stages in education. Maybe we need to put more effort, at least in some countries, on this. But if we go to Africa, for example, West Africa, you will realize that people use all the time, for example, the mobile phones for accessing content on the internet. They don't really verify anything. Not everyone is in the same position. Not everybody has the same technology, and it's a big issue. And more important, I think that once you have the emotional impact brought by the videos and the images, it's something that I don't think that you can get rid of that so easily. Probably the emotional impact still persists, even if something has been fact-checked or has been verified or whatever, that has nothing to do with reality. Still, you have that image in your brain. Yeah. So some thoughts on this.
Absolutely. I was wondering because we're talking about the fact that we might not have enough technological capabilities, and yet we're talking about the need to put forward legislation to try to shape a little bit the regulatory framework that we use to tackle all those issues. But if we do not have the technological capabilities, how can we enforce the legislation then?
Yeah, Beatrice, if I may, I just want to add to what Ruben was saying there with regards to developing detection. And indeed, this is something I'm very familiar with, having worked in a company that was doing so for a while. And whilst they made some really good progress with the technology, deepfake detection is incredibly hard. It's a moving target. It's an adversarial dynamic where bad actors are constantly looking to reverse engineer your systems, and also new techniques are being developed. There's layers of media, right? So there are different kinds of manipulations you can layer on top of each other, or for example, just compress a video so it's got not actually much, fidelity, and then it's harder to detect. Facebook's deepfake detection challenge, which brought together, a huge consortium of researchers to try and build a good detection system. The best score that got was a 65% accuracy, which is no way near good enough to be deployed in critical context, right? You would not want that if you were relying on whether a video of a politician that was incredibly defamatory or potentially criminal was real or not. And indeed, returning to this example in Myanmar, one of the really worrying things that Sam from Witness and I observed whilst we were kind of working in scrambling to get some information out was activists were using free online deepfake detectors, which are not very good, to analyze the video. And in doing so, they got false confidence that it was fake because these detection systems are not properly framed, they are not explained properly. And so actually, deepfake detection can do much more harm than good if it's not robust and responsibly deployed by the right people. So it's a hugely challenging proposition. And this is where I'd agree with Michael that content authenticity and provenance is perhaps a more promising, wider solution for more people.
Would you like to follow up on that, Michael, maybe?
Yeah, I think in a way it's no different to other parts of disinformation. And we know, following on what Ruben said, that even people sometimes suspect it's disinformation, but they like it. They like the message, so they keep posting it. And it's not even very important to them whether it's real or not, because they say, maybe it's not real, but it could be real because that person is so bad. So all this is has the same challenges, I think, that we have in other fields of disinformation. The problem I see, and it relates to what Henry said, it's perceived as a extremely technical field because AI comes in, etc. And so there is this belief that the solution must be hyper-technical as well. And then we come into what Henry just explained, into a certain naivety. And then you have business incentives that fuel that. So you have these companies that want to sell software and they say it works really well, and then people use it, but it doesn't work well. And maybe it has only 50% accuracy, and then it makes the problem even bigger. So you have, on the one hand, people creating deepfake for business interests and others pretending that they can detect them for business interests, but the whole thing doesn't lead anywhere close to an environment of truthful information or manipulation being clearly marked. So the one thing, if we look at the legislation, so you have the AI Act, it doesn't build, I think, on the idea that we can detect deepfakes and then you do something about it. Builds more on the idea that if you are a company that produces software to create deepfakes, or if you're a user and you consciously use that, you have higher responsibilities. And that's maybe a first start. So that's okay, I think. The problem, I think, it will do basically nothing about conscious bad actors. It's for me a bit like saying we sell guns to, I don't know, for hunters to shoot wild boar, and it's a high-risk thing, guns, and therefore we have to be careful. And if you produce guns, you must be careful it's not abused. But you know, any bank robber will say, yeah, sure, this is all written in the law, but I use this gun now to rob a bank. So somehow, I think it does absolutely nothing for anybody who wants, in a targeted way, to abuse deepfakes. And that's one element where I feel, you know, in the Digital Service Act, for example, we want to put more responsibilities on social media platforms, and they should carry out risk assessment of anything that can go wrong on their platform. So there I would, I think, mention deepfakes more explicitly, that we want to hear more, and in the code of conduct also to develop more of these KPIs to say you have to somehow quantify of what you are doing in this field. And the third one is maybe on detection. We cannot believe, we should not give the idea that there's a technical solution to detection as such. As Henry said, even the best models had only 65% success rate, and that basically doesn't help at all. If you cannot be, if there's a 35% risk that that actually the opposite is true, then you know we cannot rely on that. And we have to understand, I think, that if we interpret, or that if we try to detect deepfake, we need still many other capabilities. I come traditionally more from political analysis, for example. So if it's a political deepfake, you cannot just look at the technical material. You have to understand the country, the context, the politics behind, to make an informed assessment on whether there's manipulation or not. But the problem is, if this becomes very widespread, you know, we can do these things on a few high-level deepfakes, but not on millions and millions of deepfakes.
Absolutely. And then there's also the question, because of what you were talking about before, Ruben, about the question of the impact that it has, and that you cannot change that, but also that the attempt to confirm the veracity or not of this product might not spread as fast as the original video story or the picture that was going very fastly being shared by many people. So obviously, even if you arrive to a conclusion that might be good enough, then that might not have the same impact as well. I wanted to do a very quick follow-up, Michael, on something that you said, because one of the assessment of many experts about the DSA, but also the legislation on AI at European level, is the fact that it relies a lot on the platforms to actually make the work. So in the end, it's up to them to take out some of the content, because it might not be verified, or it might be fake news, and these also relate to deepfake. Do you agree with this assessment? There is too much on the hands of the companies, or do you think that the European Union could do something in a different way to ensure that there is more control over the content that is shared, not only on social media, but maybe on some other websites as well?
Yeah, it may be a bit surprising because I'm a lawyer, but I think in the EU we are too comfortable to think that we can legislate a problem away. And I think it should be clear that it's only one of many elements. And my recommendation would be that the EU gets much more involved in basically connecting to these companies to have much better understanding of this field. As Henry said, it's developing super fast. Legislation will always be slow anyway, and there may be many other political ways. Already we have soft law like code of conduct, which can be much faster adapt it, but to establish many more channels of communication, of finding out what the industry is doing, and then see how this may impact on legislation. But I think we need a lot more political engagement with the reality of all that. And, you know, we have a big initiative, content authenticity initiative, and governments are, as far as I can judge, nowhere to be seen. And maybe there isn't even a lot of capacity on the side of the EU to have experts who go there and connect and report and understand. And that's, for me, often a bit a missing element here, that we understand an emerging threat. We understand that something needs to be done about it, and we jump to law, but we should be much more closely involved with people who basically control the infrastructures where these threats come from, and who don't have bad intentions. They also would like the threat not to happen, but we need to talk to them, understand what they do, and maybe tell them it's not good enough, and we legislate if you don't do more. But I feel there are lots and lots of missing connections. And the bigger one, which is not detection, is more this provenance that we mentioned several times here. As I said, I think that would really require high-level diplomacy with many, many players to establish if there's not a way that a huge amount of videos being produced could have a provenance mark, if you want, that you could always see when it's broken, and could then say, well, something is not authentic anymore about this video. But this is also, we are nowhere near to that, but you know, it's something we should explore a lot, and in industry some people believe it could work.
Absolutely.
If I
I was going to give you the floor just right now because you were nodding very strongly, but I also would like to take the opportunity to bring one of the questions from our audience in, just related to what we're talking about, so you might want to address it as well. It's coming from Ola Gabrielson, and she's asking, would it be possible that video players software could be legally bound to display not verified on top of videos without non-verified reputation? And I think this is a huge challenge, so you might want to address it as well, but go ahead.
Sure. No, I can definitely incorporate that question into the kind of follow-up to Michael's really insightful points there. I mean, I just finished writing a report which will be released in a couple of months with Witness and MIT, looking specifically at kind of ethical gray areas surrounding synthetic media. And one of the key topics is how social media platforms moderate content, specifically in cases where it's unclear, for example, with like satire, whether it's actually satirical content or whether it's intentionally deceptive content being hidden behind the guise of satire. And as with any malicious content on social media, the volume of UGC or user-generated content that gets uploaded every minute is obscene. You know, we're talking about a scale that is just unbelievably difficult to manage. And as we've seen with Facebook in particular, manual human moderation is incredibly difficult and has a high human cost. But also, as we've seen with deepfake detection, it's not good enough to scale it. You need a human in the loop. It can be maybe used as an augmentation of an existing verification process, but is not something which could be scaled on its own successfully. And so the platforms are in an incredibly difficult position here as to how they basically keep their platform open to content and don't essentially just kind of catch a lot of other stuff which is legitimate free expression, such as deepfake parody and satire, which is fine, or memes or other kinds of creative content, but also catching the malicious stuff effectively. And I think that is hugely challenging. I think in response to Ola's question, you know, as Michael talked about, Adobe's Content Authenticity Initiative is really pushing to create an open standard for authentication of video and images. And through this coalition behind the initiative, Twitter has joined. And so it is likely that at some point in the near future, Twitter will implement some either kind of implementation of a content authenticity standard like this, which would be more about verifying content as opposed to saying something isn't verified, right? So it's going to be labeling what has been verified, not labeling what hasn't. You know, I'm sure we will see other platforms follow suit as pressure builds, but I think, you know, as Michael said, there's no silver bullet here. We need a wide range of stakeholders engaged. We need coming at this from different angles. And also we need to have a nuanced understanding that, you know, synthetic media as a technology, you know, has got some really exciting use cases. You know, hyper-realistic synthetic media could revolutionize video games and film and entertainment. And again, 3 billion videos generated with reface. It's a new form of meme. It's a new form of kind of personal expression. And so I think, you know, we really need to see this as like a revolution in content creation and synthetic media, which we need to make sure that we don't catch a lot of the kind of legitimate use cases along with the bad stuff when legislating. And in fact, I'm going to be working with Metaphysic AI, which is the company developed by Chris Ume, the guy behind Deep Tom Cruise, focusing on hyper-realistic synthetic media. And I would invite your audience to reach out to me if they're interested in understanding more about the technology and working together to make sure ethical and responsible synthetic media is developed in line with governments and policymakers.
Thank you so much for that, because indeed something that we haven't talked about, but it's definitely part of the issue, is that this is an art in itself. It's a way of producing content. It's something that might not necessarily had to be so bad, but it just has indeed, as any tool can be used in a malicious way. Because we're running out of time, I'm going to give you the word for the last time. And I am going to ask you to touch on an issue that we've briefly talked about, but I think it was at the core of this discussion, and is the question of the potential impact of the use of deepfake for democracy. And I was wondering, what do you think is the main challenge for democracy when it comes to deepfake? Whether it's this default disbelief among the citizens, whether it's actually the use that can be in terms of national security, as we have seen over the past few months. So what do you think can be the impact of the deepfake for democracy, and what do you think is the main challenge, and how can the EU address it? And I'm going to start with Michael, because I know he has to run.
I may jump at this point first. You know, challenges, I think that there are lots of challenges. For me, you know, one important point is, as I was starting in the presentation, the foreign manipulations, foreign information manipulations, how, for example, foreign governments can try to interfere in our electoral processes, but also in the, you know, getting societies more and more polarized through the use of this kind of stuff by the means, perhaps through proxies. So I think that it is an important point. One important approach to this is, you know, the kind of stuff that is being conducted by, for example, the Information Analysis and Strategic Communication Division at the European External Action Service, the same way that they are doing really good stuff related to traditional, or let's say, you know, foreign information manipulations. You know, some kind of exposure as well, aiming to inoculate users on how these deepfakes look like, and you know what are the kind of things that you can do. You know, might be useful for individuals, and extending all these, you know, through initiatives at the educational level, through different programs. I think it will be well worth. So inoculation strategies, and by showing the kind of things that you can already do, and also try to build long-standing awareness and critical approaches.
Thank you so much for that. Maybe Michael, you would like to jump in on your conclusion?
Thank you. Yeah, and afterwards I will leave. I hope it's not impolite, but I have to catch a train. And so, therefore, very briefly, I think it will be an accelerator of all the disinformation challenges we already have. As I said, we should see that in the same field somehow, but just at the next level of challenges. And I think the challenge comes in all the fields you mentioned, Beatrice, so I wouldn't necessarily figure one out. In terms of responses, I think some European governments have tech ambassadors. I don't always know what exactly they are doing, but I think it would be really good if the EU would start thinking more about focal points or special ambassadors or envoys who really are very well versed in these themes and that travel around and talk a lot to the companies also to become really realistic on this and understand how this field evolves and can speak at high level, I think, with many interlocutors about it. In addition to the usual spiel of threat, challenge, legislation. Thank you. Great to meet you.
Thank you so much, and no worries at all, Michael. Of course, you can leave. We don't want you to miss the train. And Henry, maybe for a close-up, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think deepfakes and synthetic media are promised a revolution in communication, and by their very nature are disruptive. For this reason, I think we need to tread carefully when it comes to not having knee-jerk reactions, whilst also building robust responses, as Ruben talked about, inoculation of general public. But I think most importantly, I think from an EU perspective, have a look at what some of our allies are doing in this space. And again, it is something I'd be happy to discuss at a further date if of interest. For example, the work that DARPA are doing with their semaphore program on detection and technological responses. Again, with Adobe and the Content Authenticity Initiative, they're doing amazing work over there, and I've been working closely with them on that front. And again, looking at some of those policy responses that some other nations are looking at. But fundamentally, again, I just think from my perspective, I've seen less engagement from the EU in the public sphere, and through my own work with my many stakeholders that I do work with in this space, than I would have liked. And I would love to for this to kind of be a moment where the EU really sees this as opportunity and isn't reacting to things, but is being proactive in getting involved and helping to stem some of the problems that we see coming, and also champion some of the cool opportunities creatively.
Thank you so much. Let's hope for that indeed. Thank you, Ruben, Henry, and Michael, for your very insightful contributions today. Thank you so much for the work that you do. I'm very much going to read all those reports that are coming up on your site, Henry. Thank you so much for that discussion. And now I'm going to give back the floor to Lauren for a close-up.
Thanks very much, Beatrice, and thank you for our excellent speakers. I think we've really learned a lot about the state of deepfakes, and that we're really sort of on the cusp of going towards a wider spread use that we need to be aware of, but not necessarily quite as afraid of. As Henry said, there are some exciting uses for content creation, but of course, as these videos are getting more realistic, they need less data to become more convincing. It is a worry. And Ruben talked about the political disinformation, the weaponization of information, whether it's by state actors or not state actors, but something that's also a concern for us as liberals, I think, especially, is this threat to individuals. And as Henry pointed out, the majority of videos circulating, currently feature non-consensual nude images, which particularly affect women. So that's something that we're, as liberals, are concerned about. And I think I just noted some of the ideas that we had for solutions. Ruben took us into this foray into Descartes, and I think it was Michael who called it disbelief by default, and that's something we do want to avoid, that we are sort of aware, but we still believe that the truth is out there. So some things were cited, such as better deepfake detection. We talked a bit about provenance technology and the potential for labeling, even if that's a bit further off. Currently, there's of course the angle of media literacy, training perhaps for law enforcement staff and programs, and we looked a bit about the EU's disinformation framework and how that could be built on to strengthen our response. So I think, yeah, it's sort of, we need to have a robust response. We need to have proactive legislation that is aware of the dangers. But I think we've had a lot of food for thought for what direction to take our research in. Some good reading materials suggested there, so we'll certainly have a look into those. So big thank you to Beatrice, Ruben, Michael and Henry, and to all who've joined us today. You'll find the recording of this video on the ELF website in case you want to check back. Next week on the agenda, we'll be looking at the Commission's Fit for 55 programme, which they will be launching next week, and getting to grips with that. And in the meantime, thanks very much for joining the European Liberal Forum's On the Agenda webinar, and see you soon.
Thank you.